March 15, 1981, Miami Beach. Griselda Blanco trusted three people in the world: her accountant, her bodyguard, and Carmen Delgado, the woman who counted her money and kept her secrets. That night, Carmen sat in Griselda's Coconut Grove mansion, watching her boss pace like a caged panther. Someone had been feeding information to the feds. Someone close, someone family. "I know who it is," Griselda said, her voice ice cold. "And tomorrow, I'm going to make them pay." What Carmen did in the next 24 hours saved her own life and destroyed a criminal empire. The DEA got their biggest bust in Miami history. And for 43 years, nobody knew the woman who brought down the cocaine queen was sitting right beside her, counting blood money and praying for forgiveness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The weight of secrets. Carmen's hands trembled as she sorted through the stacks of hundreds, 50s, and 20s scattered across Griselda's mahogany desk. The bills reeked of sweat, perfume, and something metallic she'd learned not to think about too deeply. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Biscayne Bay glittered under the full moon like scattered diamonds on black velvet. "How much this week?" Griselda's voice cut through the silence like a blade. 2.3 million. Carmen kept her eyes on the money, knowing better than to meet her boss's gaze when she was in this mood. The shipment from Medellin cleared customs without problems. "Your brother's contact at the port came through." Griselda stopped pacing. In the reflection of the window, Carmen watched her boss's face twist into something predatory. "My brother's contact." Yes. Very convenient how smooth everything went. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Carmen's stomach clenched, but she continued counting. 100, 200, 300. The rhythm steadied her nerves, gave her something to focus on, besides the growing certainty that tonight someone was going to die. "You know what I learned today, Carmen?" Griselda moved closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. "The feds knew about our warehouse in Hialeah. They knew about the boat coming in from Cartagena. They knew the exact fucking time." Carmen's fingers stilled on a stack of 20s. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone's been whispering in their ears. Someone who knows our business inside and out." Griselda's hand fell on Carmen's shoulder, and Carmen fought every instinct screaming at her to run. "Someone I trust!" The irony was suffocating. For 8 months, Carmen had been passing information to Special Agent Robert Martinez through coded flower arrangements delivered to his wife's office. White roses meant shipment delays. Red carnations signaled new distribution routes. And yesterday, she'd sent baby's breath. The signal that meant Griselda was planning something big, something that would put innocent people in danger. She'd never meant for it to go this far. When Agent Martinez first approached her 2 years ago with photos of her sister Sophia's kids, explaining how the drugs flowing through their neighborhood were killing teenagers, Carmen had said no. But then Sophia's youngest, Miguel, only 14, had overdosed on cocaine laced with battery acid. By the time they got him to the hospital, he was already gone. That night, Carmen made her deal with the devil wearing a DEA badge. "Who do you think it is?" Carmen asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Griselda's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Process of elimination, mija. My bodyguard Luis has been with me since Medellin. He'd die before betraying me. My accountant Roberto, he's too fucking scared to cross me, and besides, the feds would never trust a man who keeps 2 sets of books for the Ochoa family." Carmen nodded, still counting money while calculating how many minutes she had left to live. "That leaves my family." Griselda spun away from the window, her silk dress flowing like liquid shadow. "My own fucking blood. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have a little family reunion. Everyone who knew about the Hialeah warehouse, everyone who knew about the boat, and we're going to find our rat." The plan crystallized in Carmen's mind with brutal clarity. If she stayed, if she attended that reunion, Griselda's paranoia would eventually land on her. The woman hadn't built a cocaine empire by trusting anyone completely. But if she ran tonight, Griselda would know immediately who the informant was. And Carmen's daughter Isabella, Sweet, innocent Isabella, who thought her mother worked in import-export, would become a target. There was only one way out, and it would require her to become the monster she'd been pretending to be for 2 years. "What do you need me to do?" Carmen asked. Griselda smiled, and for a moment she looked almost maternal. "Just keep doing what you do best, Carmen. Count the money, keep the books, and help me clean up this mess. You're the only one I can trust completely." The words hit Carmen like physical blows. Trust. After everything she'd done, every secret she'd sold, every operation she'd compromised, Griselda still trusted her. The guilt was almost unbearable, but underneath it ran something harder and colder: resolve. She thought about Miguel's funeral, about the way Sofia had collapsed over his tiny coffin. She thought about the 14-year-old girl they'd found last month in an alley off Calle Ocho, needle still in her arm, Griselda's product burning through her veins. She thought about Isabella, asleep in their Coral Gables apartment, dreaming innocent dreams. "I won't let you down," Carmen said, and for the first time in 8 months, she meant every word. The money was counted, the ledger updated, the plans set in motion. By tomorrow night, either Carmen would be dead, or the most powerful drug queenpin in Miami history would be wearing federal handcuffs. Carmen had 43 years to regret what came next. 43 years later. The orchids arrived every Tuesday at 6 a.m., their petals still jeweled with morning dew from the Miami humidity. Carmen Delgado ran her fingers along their delicate stems as she arranged them in the cooler, the purple and white blooms reminding her of bruises that had long since healed. At 58, her hands were steady now. No tremor, no shake, nothing to betray the woman who once counted blood money with fingers that couldn't stop shaking. Delgado's flowers occupied a narrow storefront on Calle Ocho, squeezed between a Cuban cafe that served the best cortadito in Little Havana and a botanica where old women bought candles to ward off evil. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent 23 years selling beauty to a community she'd once helped poison. But penance took many forms. The bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Herrera shuffled in for her weekly arrangement. White roses for her husband's grave. Carmen had been making the same bouquet every Tuesday for 7 years, ever since Mr. Herrera's heart gave out during a domino game at Maximo Gomez Park. "Buenos dias, Señora Herrera." "The usual?" "Sí, mija. But make them extra beautiful today. It's our anniversary." The old woman's eyes crinkled with a sadness that time had gentled but never erased. Carmen's chest tightened. She understood that particular grief, the love that persisted long after its object had turned to ash in memory. She selected the finest roses, their heads heavy and perfect, and wrapped them in brown paper tied with cream ribbon. "No charge today," Carmen said, pressing the bouquet into weathered hands. Mrs. Herrera protested, but Carmen waved her away. Some debts couldn't be settled with money. The morning passed in its familiar rhythm. Fresh deliveries cataloged and arranged. Orders filled for quinceañeras and weddings and funerals, the milestones that marked ordinary lives lived in the open, under real names with nothing to hide. Carmen had built this quiet existence petal by petal, day by day, until she almost believed it herself. Her phone buzzed. A text from Isabella flying into Mia tonight. "Can't wait to see you, Mommy." Carmen's daughter would be 31 next month, a pediatric nurse in Atlanta with laugh lines around her eyes and a heart too generous for her own good. Isabella knew her mother as a widow who'd struggled to build a small business, who'd worked double shifts to pay for college, who made the world's best arroz con pollo and cried at sappy movies. She didn't know about the ledgers hidden in a safety deposit box across town, or the real reason they'd moved from their Coral Gables apartment when Isabella was 8 years old. Carmen touched the small scar above her left eyebrow, a souvenir from the night everything changed. She'd told Isabella it was from a childhood accident, another lie in a foundation built entirely of them. The afternoon brought familiar customers with familiar orders. Carmen moved through the motions automatically, cutting stems at precise angles, arranging colors for maximum impact, calculating change from the vintage cash register she'd bought at an estate sale. The register had belonged to a bakery in Coral Gables, and sometimes she wondered if it too carried secrets, if every business in Miami was built on the bones of something else. Around 4 o'clock, the shadows lengthened and the foot traffic slowed. Carmen was deadheading roses when she noticed the man across the street. 30s, lean build, wearing a guayabera that looked too crisp for the heat. He'd been there for 20 minutes, pretending to read a newspaper while watching her shop. Her blood turned to ice water. Carmen forced herself to continue working, muscle memory taking over while her mind raced. It could be nothing. Miami was full of men in guayaberas who loitered on street corners, but something about his posture, the way he held his shoulders, reminded her of federal agents from another lifetime. She thought of Isabella, probably already at the airport, eager to spend a long weekend with her mother. Isabella, who believed in happy endings and second chances because she'd never seen what people were truly capable of when everything they loved hung in the balance. The man folded his newspaper and walked away, but Carmen's hands had started to shake for the first time in 23 years. That night, as she locked up the shop and breathed in the mingled scents of jasmine and car exhaust that defined her neighborhood, Carmen allowed herself to hope she was being paranoid. After all, Griselda Blanco had been dead for 12 years, gunned down in Medellin by someone who remembered her sins better than her legend. The past was supposed to stay buried. But as she drove home through streets that glittered with neon and possibility, Carmen couldn't shake the feeling that 43 years of careful anonymity were about to come to an end. Inciting incident. Carmen's apartment in Coral Gables sat in deliberate contrast to the chaos of her old life. Cream walls, simple furniture, photographs of Isabella at graduations and birthdays where everyone smiled with genuine happiness. She'd chosen this place specifically for its normalcy, the way it whispered respectability instead of screaming wealth built on blood. She was arranging the roses she'd brought home from the shop when her landline rang. Carmen froze, staring at the old rotary phone she kept out of sentiment, or perhaps superstition. Nobody called the landline. Isabella used her cell. Her few customers had her business number. The only people who knew this number were... The phone rang again, its vintage chime cutting through the silence like a blade. On the third ring, Carmen lifted the receiver. Hello? Silence stretched across the line, filled only with the faint crackle of a connection that seemed to span decades. Then, a voice she'd hoped never to hear again. 43 years, Carmen. You've had 43 years to enjoy what should have been mine. The voice was older now, roughened by time and cigarettes and God knew what else, but unmistakable. Carmen's legs gave out, and she collapsed into her kitchen chair, the phone clutched against her ear like a lifeline to hell. Rafa, she whispered. Rafael Salazar laughed, the same bitter sound that used to echo through Griselda's compound when someone had disappointed him. Griselda's nephew, her enforcer, the man who'd been in federal prison when the empire fell, the man who was supposed to have died in a Bogota shootout 15 years ago. Surprised? You always were too trusting, Hermana. Too quick to believe what people told you about who was dead and who was still breathing. Carmen forced herself to speak. What do you want? Want? I want my life back. I want the money that was stolen from my family. I want the woman who put my aunt in the ground to pay for what she did. His voice dropped to a whisper. But mostly, Carmen, I want you to remember what you cost me. The words hit her like physical blows. Through her kitchen window, she could see lights flickering on in neighboring apartments. Normal people living normal lives, making dinner and helping children with homework, and worrying about ordinary things like mortgage payments and parent-teacher conferences. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but the lie felt hollow even to her own ears. Don't you? Then maybe you need a reminder. The sound of paper rustling came through the line. August 15, 1981. Payment to Martinez, $50,000 for the Hialeah warehouse location. September 3, 1981. Payment to Martinez, $75,000 for the cargo manifest from the Cartagena shipment. Carmen's vision blurred. Her own handwriting, her own careful records, the ledger she'd kept as insurance, evidence of every payoff, every piece of information sold, every betrayal that had brought down the Blanco Empire. The ledger she'd hidden away and never touched, the one piece of evidence that could destroy the life she'd built. Where did you get that? Your old safety deposit box in Aventura. Amazing what you can accomplish with the right connections and a few decades of patience. You were always so careful, Carmen, so thorough. Every transaction documented, every payment recorded, Griselda would have been proud of your attention to detail. The irony was crushing. The same compulsive record-keeping that had made her valuable to Griselda and to the DEA had now become the instrument of her destruction. "What do you want?" she asked again. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., your little flower shop. We're going to have a conversation about old debts, about justice delayed but not forgotten, about what happens to rats who live too long in their holes. Rafa, please." "And Carmen?" "I know about Isabella. 24 Forest Avenue, apartment 3B in Atlanta. Pediatric oncology at Children's Healthcare. Such a beautiful girl, such a pure heart. It would be a shame if she had to pay for her mother's sins." The line went dead. Carmen sat in her kitchen for 20 minutes, the dial tone buzzing in her ear, her body frozen between past and present. Then, moving like a woman underwater, she walked to her bedroom and pulled out the small suitcase she'd kept packed for 23 years, the go-bag that contained cash, fake documents, and everything she'd need to disappear again. But this time was different. This time she wasn't 28 and desperate, with only herself to protect. This time she had Isabella, who would land at Miami International in 3 hours, expecting a quiet weekend with her mother. Isabella, who knew nothing about the woman who'd raised her, who thought evil was something that happened to other families in other places. Carmen set the suitcase on her bed and opened it, staring at the identity documents for Maria Santos, the woman she'd planned to become if this day ever came. But Maria Santos was a ghost, a shadow, a woman who could run but could never love anything enough to stay and fight for it. For the first time in 43 years, Carmen realized she couldn't run. The past had finally come home, and it was hungry. Early development. Carmen stood over the open suitcase for another 10 minutes, her hands hovering above documents that promised escape but delivered only emptiness. Maria Santos smiled up at her from a Florida driver's license photo, a woman with the same face but different eyes, harder eyes, the kind that belonged to someone who had already lost everything that mattered. She snapped the suitcase shut and shoved it back under the bed. Whatever came next, she would face it as Carmen Delgado, not as another ghost fleeing into the night. The drive to Miami International felt like moving through water. Every traffic light seemed to last forever, every mile marker counting down to a moment when she would have to look into her daughter's trusting face and pretend the world hadn't shifted off its axis. Carmen practiced normal in the rearview mirror, the smile Isabella expected, the easy laugh, the casual questions about work and weather, and anything except the 43-year-old sins that had just crawled out of their graves. Isabella emerged from the terminal looking exactly like what she was, a woman who saved children's lives for a living and believed deeply in the possibility of healing. Her scrubs were wrinkled from the flight, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and when she spotted Carmen waiting by the pickup zone, her face lit up with uncomplicated joy. "Mommy!" Isabella threw her arms around Carmen's neck, and for a moment the world felt solid again. "You look tired. Are you working too hard again?" "Just busy season," Carmen lied, breathing in her daughter's familiar scent, hospital soap and vanilla lotion and something indefinably sweet that had belonged to Isabella since she was small. "How was your flight?" They talked about nothing important during the drive home. Isabella's latest cases, the pediatric ward's fundraiser for new equipment, the pediatric resident she'd been seeing who made her laugh. Normal conversation for a normal evening between a normal mother and daughter. Carmen held on to each ordinary word like a lifeline, memorizing the sound of Isabella's voice discussing mundane happiness. "Are you sure you're okay?" Isabella asked as they pulled into Carmen's parking space. "You seem, I don't know, distracted." Carmen forced another smile. "Just excited to see you. It's been too long." But that night, after Isabella had fallen asleep in the spare room that Carmen had decorated specifically for her visits, soft blues and whites, nothing that whispered of violence or secrets, Carmen sat in her kitchen and stared at her phone. She could call the DEA. Agent Martinez was long retired, probably dead, but there would be others. She could turn herself in, make a deal, disappear into witness protection. But that would mean telling Isabella everything. It would mean watching her daughter's world collapse, as she learned that her mother was not a struggling widow, but a woman who had once counted blood money and helped orchestrate executions. The thought made Carmen physically sick. Instead, she found herself dialing a number she'd memorized but never used, a contact from the old days who specialized in making problems disappear. The phone rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. Esperanza. It's Carmen. Carmen Delgado. Silence stretched across the line. Then, Mierda. Carmen? I thought you were dead. I know. Listen, I need... No. The word came fast and hard. Whatever you need, the answer is no. I'm out, Carmen. Have been for 20 years. Got grandchildren now, a legitimate business. I don't need ghosts dragging me back into that world. Esperanza, please. Someone's found... But the line was already dead. Carmen tried 2 more numbers with identical results. The moment her name crossed their lips, old associates hung up, or claimed wrong numbers, or suddenly developed amnesia about ever knowing anyone called Carmen Delgado. The criminal underworld had its own version of witness protection, strategic forgetting, convenient blindness, the ability to make inconvenient people disappear from memory as well as flesh. She was alone. At 3 in the morning, Carmen gave up pretending she might sleep. She made coffee and sat at her kitchen table, watching the darkness outside her window and thinking about choices made 43 years ago by a younger woman who believed she was saving the world one betrayal at a time. When Isabella wandered into the kitchen at 7, yawning and wrapped in the bathrobe Carmen kept specifically for her visits, she found her mother exactly where she'd left her 8 hours earlier. Mommy, did you sleep at all? Carmen looked up from her untouched coffee, and for a moment she almost told her daughter everything. The words crowded in her throat, the truth about who she really was, what she'd done, the danger that was walking toward them both with deliberate, patient steps. But then Isabella smiled, soft and concerned and completely trusting, and Carmen swallowed the confession. Just thinking about the shop, she said. Big delivery today. Isabella squeezed her shoulder. You work too hard. Maybe I should come with you, help out. No. The word came out sharper than Carmen intended. Isabella's eyebrows rose, and Carmen forced a laugh. I mean, you're on vacation. Relax. Sleep in. I'll be back by lunch. But as Carmen drove through the morning traffic toward her flower shop and whatever waited for her there, she wondered if lunch would ever come at all. The shop felt like a mausoleum when Carmen unlocked the door at 8:30. The familiar sense of roses and baby's breath, which usually comforted her, now seemed cloying, heavy with the weight of secrets about to surface. Her hands shook as she flipped the lights, illuminating arrangements that suddenly looked like funeral displays. 20 minutes until her past walked through that door. Carmen tried to busy herself with morning routines, checking the cooler temperatures, refreshing the water in the display vases, arranging the day's orders. But every movement felt mechanical, disconnected, as if she were watching someone else perform the motions of a life about to end. At 9:50, the bell chimed. Rafael Salazar had aged into something harder than the 30-year-old enforcer she remembered. Prison had carved deep lines around his eyes and turned his hair silver, but his smile remained the same, a predator's expression that never reached his eyes. He wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the way he moved, coiled and ready. Carmen. He spoke her name like a prayer and a curse. You look good. Peaceful. 23 years of sleep must agree with you. She forced herself to meet his gaze. What do you want, Rafa? What I want? He laughed, moving between her displays like he owned the space. I want my nephew Miguel back. He'd be 34 now, probably have children of his own. But Miguel died in Medellin when he was 11 because the Federales raided our family compound with information that could only have come from someone very close to Griselda. Carmen's throat closed. She'd never known about the children. I want my sister Anna back. She was washing clothes in the river when the paramilitaries came for our family. They found her because they knew exactly where we sent our women when things got dangerous. Information someone sold for 30 pieces of silver. He picked up a white rose, turning it slowly in his fingers. But mostly, Carmen, I want you to understand what you stole from me. Not just money, not just family. You stole 43 years of justice. I was trying to stop the killing. Were you? The rose stem snapped between his fingers. Or were you just another ambitious woman playing all sides? The DEA paid you, didn't they? Fed you enough money to disappear, start fresh, build this pretty little life while my family rotted in graves or prison cells. Carmen's legs felt weak, but she remained standing. How did you find me? Miguel's son, my grandnephew, sweet boy, works for the DEA now. Raphael's smile widened. Agent David Salazar. You'd be amazed how motivated he became when he learned his grandfather didn't die in a car accident like we told him, when he discovered his whole family was murdered by someone the American government protected. The words hit Carmen like physical blows. The federal agent who'd been watching her shop, who knew about the ledgers, he was family. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about a new generation seeking justice for sins they'd only recently learned about. David's been very thorough, Raphael continued. Amazing what you can access with a federal badge and righteous anger. Bank records, property transfers, even sealed witness protection files. Did you know they listed you as deceased in 1983? Overdose in a Tampa motel. Very convenient. Carmen thought about Isabella, probably still sleeping in the apartment, wrapped in the innocent belief that her mother was exactly who she claimed to be. Leave my daughter out of this. Your daughter? Raphael's expression shifted, becoming something worse than anger, pity. Carmen, your daughter stopped being safe the moment you decided to play God with other people's families. But I'm not without mercy. I'll give you a choice. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it carefully on her counter between a bouquet of lilies and a small cactus arrangement. Everything's in there. Bank account numbers in the Caymans where they stashed your blood money, property records, even some lovely photographs of you meeting with Agent Martinez in 1981. David's been building quite the file. Carmen stared at the envelope like it contained a live bomb. Choice 1, Raphael said. You disappear again, tonight. Leave the girl, take nothing but what's in that envelope, and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. I'll consider the debt partially paid. And, choice 2? You stay. Face what's coming. Let Isabella learn who her mother really is. Let the whole world see what St. Carmen has been hiding. His voice dropped to a whisper. And trust that my family's justice will be swift. Carmen's hands found the edge of the counter, gripping it to keep from falling. Through the window, she could see normal people starting their normal Friday. Construction workers grabbing coffee, mothers walking children to school, delivery trucks navigating the morning rush. She'd spent 23 years believing she could leave the past buried, that silence was enough to wash away the blood. But some stains never faded, and some debts always came due. How long do I have? She asked. Until tomorrow night. The anniversary of Griselda's death seems appropriate. The bell chimed as he left, but the sound felt different now, not welcoming but final, like the closing of a coffin lid. Carmen stood frozen for 10 minutes after the bell fell silent, staring at the manila envelope like it might spontaneously combust. Her hands shook as she finally lifted it, feeling the weight of photographs and documents that could destroy everything she'd built. The paper felt rough against her fingertips, real and damning and inescapable. She opened it slowly. The first photograph made her knees buckle. There she was, 28 years old, sitting across from Agent Martinez in what looked like a Denny's booth. Her younger face was earnest, desperate, leaning forward as she passed a manila folder across the table. The timestamp read August 15, 1981, the same date Raphael had quoted over the phone. Her own meticulous handwriting had condemned her, but it was the second photograph that made the world tilt sideways. Agent Martinez wasn't alone in the booth. A man sat beside him, partially obscured by shadow, but Carmen would recognize that profile anywhere. The same aquiline nose, the same sharp jawline, the same way of holding his head slightly tilted when he was listening intently. Rafael Salazar, 23 years younger, wearing a cheap suit instead of prison orange, but unmistakably Griselda's nephew. Carmen's vision blurred as the truth crashed over her in waves. Raphael hadn't been hunting her for 43 years. He'd known exactly where she was the entire time. He'd known because he'd been there when she made the deal, when Agent Martinez recruited her, when they'd crafted the fiction that would bring down Griselda's empire. Another photograph, Raphael shaking Martinez's hand outside the DEA field office. A bank receipt with Raphael's signature, dated 2 weeks before Griselda's arrest. A typed document with the FBI letterhead, authorizing payment to Asset RS7 for services rendered in the Blanco investigation. Carmen sank onto the stool behind her counter, the photographs scattered around her like pieces of a shattered mirror. She'd spent 43 years believing she was the only informant, the lone betrayer, the woman who'd sold out the cocaine queen for blood money and a chance at redemption. But she'd never been alone in the game. Raphael had been working with the DEA longer than she had. The door chimed again, and Carmen looked up expecting to see him returning for some final twist of the knife. Instead, a young woman with a stroller browsed the roses near the window, completely oblivious to the wreckage of revelations surrounding the cash register. "Excuse me," the woman called. "Do you have anything appropriate for a christening? Something pure, innocent?" Carmen almost laughed at the cosmic irony. "White lilies," she managed, symbol of rebirth and purity. As she mechanically arranged the flowers, her mind raced through 43 years of carefully constructed lies. Every story Raphael had told her, about his family's deaths, about the children killed in raids, about his sister Anna washing clothes by the river, was crafted manipulation. He'd fed her guilt and grief designed to make her compliant, desperate, willing to pay any price for absolution. But why? If Raphael had been working with the feds all along, why surface now? Why threaten Isabella? Why demand payment for a debt that was as much his as hers? The answer came like a punch to the gut, David Salazar. The DEA agent wasn't Raphael's grandnephew seeking justice. He was Raphael's son, and he'd discovered his father's true role in bringing down the Blanco Empire. David had found the real files, the ones that showed Raphael collecting federal paychecks while his aunt's organization crumbled. He'd learned that his father wasn't a victim of Carmen's betrayal, he was her partner in it, which meant Raphael wasn't here for revenge. He was here to clean up loose ends before his own sins caught up with him. Carmen wasn't his target, she was his scapegoat. The young mother paid for her lilies and left, the bell's chime echoing in the suddenly quiet shop. Carmen gathered the photographs with trembling hands, her mind rewriting 43 years of history. Every moment of guilt, every sleepless night wondering about the blood on her hands, every prayer for forgiveness, all based on a lie. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd found in the envelope's back pocket, hands steadier now than they'd been all morning. "Agent Salazar. This is Carmen Delgado. I think we need to talk." Silence stretched across the line. Then Miss Delgado, "I don't think that's—" "About your father," Carmen interrupted. "About what really happened in 1981. About why he's so eager to make me disappear before you learn the whole truth." More silence, but she could hear him breathing, thinking, recalculating. "Where?" he asked finally. Carmen looked around her flower shop, at 23 years of peace and normalcy and carefully tended lies. Tomorrow, none of this would exist, but maybe, if she played this right, Isabella could emerge from the wreckage unscathed. "1 hour," she said. "And Agent Salazar? Bring everything you think you know about your family. I promise you, it's not enough." Carmen closed the shop early, something she'd never done in 23 years of business. Her hands moved automatically, dimming lights, checking locks, turning the open sign to closed, while her mind churned through possibilities and impossibilities. The manila envelope lay heavy in her purse, its contents burning like radioactive material against her hip. She drove to Bayfront Park without conscious thought, muscle memory navigating Miami streets while her thoughts remained trapped in 1981. The waterfront stretched gray and restless under afternoon clouds, tourists and locals scattered across benches and walkways, like pieces on a board game she was only now learning to play. Agent David Salazar was already waiting when she arrived, sitting alone on a bench facing Biscayne Bay. Up close, without the careful distance of customer and florist, the family resemblance was unmistakable. He had Raphael's sharp features softened by youth and what she hoped was conscience. His DEA jacket hung open over jeans and a white t-shirt, off-duty, unofficial, everything about this meeting designed to stay invisible. "Ms. Delgado." He stood as she approached, uncertain whether to extend his hand or maintain the careful hostility of their previous encounters. Carmen sat without invitation, placing her purse between them like a barrier. "How long have you known who I really am?" 6 months. His voice carried exhaustion that went deeper than sleepless nights. Maybe longer. I kept finding inconsistencies in the files. Witnesses who died or disappeared. Evidence that didn't match the official narrative. And your father never mentioned me. David's laugh held no humor. My father never mentioned a lot of things, including the fact that he worked for the DEA while his own aunt was building a cocaine empire, or that he collected federal paychecks for information that got half his family killed. Carmen studied his profile, seeing Raphael's bone structure warped by years of lies and recent revelation. When did you figure it out? 3 weeks ago. I was reviewing cold cases, cross-referencing informant files with known associates of the Blanco organization. Your real name showed up in a sealed witness protection file. Carmen Restrepo, deceased 1983, overdose in Tampa. Except property records showed Carmen Delgado purchasing a Miami Beach flower shop in 1984 with cash that traced back to federal accounts. The wind off the bay carried salt and the distant sound of boat engines. Normal people living normal lives, oblivious to the wreckage washing up on their shores. I confronted him yesterday, David continued. Walked into his house with 40 years of evidence and asked him to explain why his son was hunting down federal witnesses without authorization. Why Agent Martinez's old partner was spending retirement tracking down women who'd been declared dead for decades. Carmen's pulse quickened. What did he say? That you killed my family. That you sold information to the highest bidder and disappeared with blood money while innocent people died. David's hands clenched in his lap. That finding you was about justice for the children who'd never grown up, the women who'd never come home, the men who'd rotted in foreign prisons, and you believed him. I wanted to believe him. The admission came quietly, almost lost in the sound of waves against the seawall. It's easier to hate someone you've never met than to face what your own father really is. Carmen reached into her purse and withdrew the manila envelope, its weight somehow heavier now that the moment had arrived. Your father gave me this today. I think he intended it as leverage, proof of my guilt to keep me silent. He didn't expect me to recognize him in the photographs. David's eyes fixed on the envelope like it contained a live grenade. What photographs? She spread them across the bench between them. 43 years of carefully hidden truth bleeding into afternoon sunlight. Raphael young and desperate, shaking hands with federal agents. Bank receipts with his signature. Authorization forms approving payment to Asset RS7. And finally, the Denny's booth where she'd believed herself the lone betrayer, unaware that Griselda's own nephew had been feeding information to the same handlers for months. David stared at the images without speaking, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and something that might have been relief or devastation. When he finally looked up, his eyes carried the hollow weight of a man watching his world reconstruct itself around ugly new truths. He played us both, Carmen said softly. Set us against each other so we'd never compare stories, never realize we were partners instead of enemies. You were supposed to eliminate the witness who could expose his real role. I was supposed to disappear quietly, taking all the guilt with me. My family, David whispered. The people who died were casualties of a war your father helped wage from both sides. He fed information to the DEA about Griselda's operations while feeding information to Griselda about federal investigations, playing every angle, collecting every paycheck, until the whole thing collapsed and someone needed to take the blame. The afternoon was dying around them, shadows lengthening across water that had witnessed decades of secrets. Carmen watched understanding settle over David's features like a physical weight, transforming him from hunter to fellow prey. So, what happens now? He asked. Carmen looked toward the Miami skyline, where Isabella waited in ignorant safety and made the only choice that mattered. Now, she said, we finish what our fathers started. The words hung between them like a challenge thrown down, and Carmen felt the familiar weight of decision that had shaped every crucial moment of her life. This time, though, she wouldn't be running toward safety or away from consequence. This time, she would run directly into the fire that had been burning for 43 years. Your father made one critical mistake, she said, gathering the photographs with steady hands. He assumed I'd stayed the same frightened woman who made deals in back booths and counted blood money in Tampa hotel rooms. He never considered that 23 years of building something clean might teach a person how to tear something dirty apart. David's eyes tracked her movements, the federal agent in him recognizing preparation for action. What are you planning? To give him exactly what he wants. Carmen stood, the envelope tucked securely against her chest. A final meeting. Tomorrow night, the anniversary he chose. Except this time, we control the terms. David rose beside her, and she heard Raphael's cadence in his voice, the family resemblance extending beyond bone structure into the rhythm of speech. He's not the desperate exile you knew 40 years ago. He's had decades to plan this, to position pieces. Going after him directly is the only option that doesn't end with my daughter learning her mother's real name from a federal indictment. The words came sharp and final. Raphael made this personal the moment he threatened Isabella. Everything else, the money, the lies, even the justice your family deserves, becomes secondary to keeping an innocent girl safe. She began walking toward the parking area, David falling into step beside her. The normal world continued around them. Joggers following the waterfront path, couples sharing late lunches, children feeding gulls from paper bags. All of it surreal against the gravity of what they were planning. He'll expect you to run, David said. That's been his experience with you. Present the threat, watch you disappear, clean up the loose ends afterward. Then we give him exactly that expectation. Carmen reached her car, keys already in her hand, for about 12 hours. She turned to face him fully, seeing past the federal badge and family resemblance to something she recognized from her own mirror, the exhaustion that came from carrying other people's sins. David, your father destroyed both our families to protect his own skin. He spent 43 years watching me live with guilt that belonged as much to him. But tomorrow night he'll learn that some debts compound interest. What do you need from me? The question came without hesitation, and Carmen felt a moment of unexpected connection with this young man who'd started as her hunter and emerged as something closer to an ally. Access. Your federal credentials can get us things civilians can't reach. And I need you to understand that after tomorrow, neither of us will be the same people we were before. David nodded slowly. I stopped being that person the moment I saw the bank receipts with his signature. Carmen opened her car door, then paused. There's something else. Something your father doesn't know that I've learned. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages until she found what she needed. Isabella isn't home sleeping like he assumes. She's in New York. Has been for 3 days. Graduate school interview at Columbia. She wanted to surprise me with the acceptance. Understanding dawned across David's features. So when he moves against her, he'll find an empty apartment and realize he's been operating with incomplete information. The same mistake that brought down Griselda, that destroyed your family, that's haunted both of us for decades. Carmen slid into the driver's seat, looking up at him through the open window. Tomorrow night, Rafael Salazar will learn what it feels like when the game changes and nobody tells you the new rules. She started the engine, but David's hand on the doorframe stopped her from leaving. Carmen, he said, and for the first time his voice carried something other than suspicion or professional distance. When this is over, when we've finished what they started, my family, your family, all the people who died because 2 cowards decided to play every side, what happens to us? The question hung in the salt air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to fully examine. Carmen thought about Isabella's laugh, about 23 years of morning routines and satisfied customers and small daily kindnesses that had built something like redemption. She thought about David's hollow eyes, about Raphael's calculated cruelty, about the endless mathematics of violence that had shaped all their lives. I don't know, she said finally, but for the first time in 43 years, we'll find out who we really are when we're not carrying other people's lies. She pulled away from the curb, watching David grow smaller in her rearview mirror, until he disappeared entirely. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning she'd been both dreading and preparing for, since the moment she'd first walked into that federal building in 1981. But tonight, for these final hours of the life she'd built from silence and secrets, Carmen Delgado would say goodbye to the woman she'd pretended to be. Tomorrow she would remember how to be Carmen Restrepo again. Resolution. The drive home took Carmen through neighborhoods that had changed and remained the same in equal measure. New condos rose where crack houses once festered, but the palm trees still swayed with the same indifferent grace they'd shown when she first arrived in Miami with federal papers and enough guilt to drown in. Tonight, watching the familiar streets blur past her windshield, she felt the peculiar lightness that came with approaching the end of a very long story. Her flower shop sat dark and quiet, but Carmen didn't stop. Instead, she drove to Isabella's apartment, using her spare key to enter the space her daughter had built. Clean lines and bright colors, textbooks scattered across a coffee table next to takeout containers, and a half-finished crossword puzzle. Evidence of a life lived without looking over shoulders, without checking locks twice, without the constant weight of unfinished business. Carmen sat in Isabella's reading chair and called her daughter's number, listening to rings that carried across 1,000 miles to a hotel room in New York. "Mom?" Isabella's voice came bright with surprise. "It's late. Is everything okay?" For 23 years, Carmen had answered that question with variations of the same lie. Tonight, she chose something closer to truth. "I wanted to hear your voice," Carmen said simply. "Tell me about the interview." Isabella launched into excited details about professors and program requirements and the view from the Columbia campus, her words painting pictures of a future that had nothing to do with cocaine routes or federal witnesses or debts measured in blood. Carmen closed her eyes and let her daughter's dreams wash over her like absolution. "Mom, you're quiet. Are you sure everything's all right?" "Everything is exactly as it should be, Mia. You follow those dreams as far as they'll take you." They talked until Isabella's voice grew heavy with approaching sleep, and Carmen whispered goodnight to the most beautiful thing she'd ever helped create. Then she sat in the darkness of her daughter's apartment and began the process of transforming back into Carmen Restrepo. The next 24 hours unfolded with the methodical precision of a woman who'd spent decades planning for this moment without realizing it. Carmen opened the flower shop for the final time, selling arrangements to customers who would never know they were buying from a ghost. David appeared twice, once to deliver federal access codes, once to confirm the evening's coordinates. But they spoke little. The plan was simple enough that words would only complicate it. At 6 o'clock, Carmen locked the flower shop door and removed the Delgado's flower sign she'd painted herself in 1984. Some endings required ceremony. Raphael had chosen the same warehouse district where Griselda's empire conducted its ugliest business, because men like him believed symbolism mattered more than strategy. Carmen arrived 30 minutes early and positioned herself where she could see his approach, watching him move through shadows with the careful gait of someone who'd survived 4 decades by trusting nothing and no one. He looked older in the amber wash of streetlights, but his eyes carried the same calculating hunger that had made him valuable to every side of every conflict he'd ever touched. "Carmen Restrepo," he said, like he was pronouncing a death sentence. "After all these years." "Raphael." She stepped into the light, letting him see the woman she'd become and the woman she'd always been. "Did you really think I'd run again?" "I thought you'd learn to survive." His hand moved inside his jacket, and Carmen felt the familiar electric calm that had carried her through 43 years of consequences. "The same way I did. By selling everyone who trusted me? By collecting paychecks from dead children?" She watched his face change as he realized she knew everything. "By letting someone else carry the guilt while I built a comfortable retirement? You don't understand the game that was played." "I understand it perfectly. I was there when you helped design it." The conversation that followed lasted 18 minutes and ended with Rafael Salazar, understanding exactly how completely he'd miscalculated. David emerged from the shadows with federal backup, badges gleaming under warehouse lights, while Carmen surrendered the evidence that would unravel 43 years of carefully buried truth. 3 months later, Carmen sat in a federal courthouse watching Rafael receive a sentence that would ensure he'd die in prison. David testified with clinical precision, his voice never wavering as he detailed his father's crimes. In the gallery, Carmen felt something she'd forgotten how to recognize: peace. Isabella flew home for Christmas, full of stories about her new program and the life she was building. She never asked why her mother had sold the flower shop, why they were moving to a smaller apartment, why Carmen seemed lighter somehow. Children, even grown ones, rarely questioned their parents' happiness. On New Year's Eve, Carmen walked the beach where she'd scattered her old identity decades earlier. The waves looked the same, but she was different, no longer running from the past or toward an uncertain future, simply present in the space between what was and what would be. She'd carried other people's sins long enough. Now, finally, she was free to carry her own.